For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sanel Dlamini, researcher and analyst. Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Do you have a sense that there are developments in the media that can affect our democratic life?
Yes, I think that the media is very important in terms of people forming choices, learning. If you learn about what's happening in your world, you can make informed choices and you can make decisions, you can form views, you can understand better what is going on in the country. So it's important to have media diversity, diversity in the things that media cover, but also in the views that are expressed in the media. Personally, I read the media mainly to get news, not so much for views, although some people's views I take very seriously. Most of the columnists I'm not myself very impressed with. But what I think made very many people quite worried in the last week is the resignation of the Mail and Guardian editor, and reports have been going on for a long time that the Mail and Guardian has got financial problems, and the possibility, well, they have retrenched people, and apparently there are quite a few people, according to Business Times, quite a few people who are going to be retrenched. And that means that the coverage, what they can cover, if, for example, you have someone who's covering environmental affairs, someone who covers some things in KZN or Northwest, whatever it is. Now, once you start cutting down those people, now those are people who do more than you will get in the Star, in the sense that they go to the place or they get informants in these places and then they analyze it. And that's what the Mail and Guardian is very good about. But what it means then is that someone who has not been a specialist on those areas will have to cover that in addition. Their time will be limited. Maybe the size of the newspaper will contract and the depth of the coverage will contract. Now, personally, I put a lot of weight on the Mail and Guardian, although I have not agreed with everything that they have done. It's 30 years old this year, I think. It was formed in the middle of the state of emergency, or between states of emergency. I actually went to a meeting in 1985 where I think they established it. I've not been involved myself on the staff or anything like that, or I've never had money to put into it. But the first editors were Anton Harbour and Erwin Manoim. And gradually a number of other editors, they left and other editors took their place. At one stage, the Mail and Guardian was also a daily newspaper. For a short time, they couldn't make it. Mail and Guardian, despite being a newspaper that is left of centre, did try to make it in the newspaper world in the conventional way of getting advertisements and subscription, but mainly advertisements. Unlike, there were a number of other newspapers that I call progressive, like New Nation, Psalmstaan in Oudtshoorn, Grassroots in Cape Town, Speak Up Here, New African, edited by Paddy Harper, if I remember correctly, in KZN. Now, a lot of these other newspapers depended on funding. New Nation, which came out once a week for about 7 years or maybe more, I'm not sure, no, maybe 10 years, it depended, I think, on the South African Catholic Bishops' Conference and maybe overseas funding. Now, all of these newspapers have disappeared. They folded. because of funders' decisions. With the onset of democracy in 1994, they've made decisions to cut back on this. And consequently, the Mail and Guardian has just about been the only newspaper that has been outside the mainstream. And for me, the problem is not purely one of it being left of center, but it's also a question of what we know about our world. For example, most newspapers tell us about what's happening in the big cities. There has been a big uprising in Limpopo around an Umplatz mine in the last few days. Now, yesterday there was no report in Business Day, no report in the Star. There was a report in the Times, there was a report in the Citizen and the Sowetan. But personally, I don't subscribe to the Citizen and the Sowetan. I got them later in the day because I wanted to follow the story. There was something on ENCA, but you know, it was quite hard. You'd have to wait for a lot of other stories before you saw it. So something big is happening, and it's not getting covered in the mainstream newspapers. And for all we know, something similar is happening in some other rural area where they don't have someone who's giving them the information. And that is a problem also in terms of understanding the ANC, because if we want to understand the ANC, we need to understand that the ANC is many things. It means one thing in Johannesburg, it means another thing in KZN, in Western Cape, but it means something completely different in the rural areas. And we don't really get that information through the conventional media. So I feel that the crisis needs to be understood as one that affects our understanding of politics, and ultimately it affects the health of our democracy, that we have a thriving media. One of the things that affects the Mail and Guardian, I think, is that government is not advertising there. And this is not just under Jacob Zuma. I think at one stage under Thabo Mbeki they were not getting adverts either. And they take a decision sometimes in some government departments or in government as a whole, or the ANC, they will not put adverts in one or other newspaper, and that is one of the reasons why they may not survive.
Who is to blame for these problems in the media? Is it just the owners, or some way the editors of the newspapers, or are you not just making too much out of this crisis in the Mail and Guardian?
You see, for a newspaper like the Mail and Guardian to survive, even if you have the best editors in the world, the business climate is very difficult for its survival. They say that the owner Trevor Mncube made some bad decisions, and he stopped printing in Zimbabwe and all sorts of things like that. I don't know, but all I know is that the environment is very difficult, and it's quite hard. Even for the conventional media, you will see they've streamlined. For example, there used to be training, in-house training in a lot of the newspapers. They've stopped that. The last one that used to be doing training, as far as I know, is the Daily Dispatch, and they stopped about 10 years ago. Now, what also happens is there used to be a parliamentary reporter, let's say from regional newspapers, going down to Cape Town. But now they all share the same one, or the legal reporter of Business Day, Fanny Rapkin, she will be reporting also for the Times sometimes for the Herald, sometimes for the Daily Dispatch, because they don't have the money to go there. So you have this problem, but I would also say diversity also depends, and the reach of a newspaper depends on the choices of editors, who they get as columnists, who they who they write for. And if you look at the newspapers, even when you've got black editors in some cases, some of the columnists have been columnists for 15, 20 years, and it may be they don't have to pay these people, but it undermines diversity. So I think some of the problems that I'm alluding to, the choices, the understandings that we have as readers, are also affected by who edits a newspaper, whether they give space to some people. It would be interesting to know whose letters are rejected, whose articles are rejected, who becomes columnists, who doesn't become columnists, things like that.
Thank you, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about the crisis in the media.